Good morning, folks, and welcome to episode 13 of the Fintech Insider Breakfast Show, a show from the folks from 11FS, bringing you the breaking news around the fintech and banking landscape every single day at 8:30 GMT. The idea of this show, you probably get the idea by now over at episode 13, right? But given the fact that we're all cooped up together over the next couple of months, we thought we'd try and just start every day a little bit brighter. And the show is going to be a bit of a mix between the 11FS family and people around the 11FS, well, not offices, but their home offices right now, and friends of 11FS from around the globe. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by the one and only Mr. Chris Skinner, who's the CEO over at the Finanser, as well as a non-executive director at 11FS. How's it going, Chris?
Good morning, Mr. Brear. I guess you chose me because I'm the April Fool.
Not at all, not at all. I think there's enough fools to go on right now. But how are you doing, my friend? How is you're over in Warsaw, aren't you?
Yeah, just outside Warsaw in a rural area, and luckily in a house with a nice big garden. So it's proving to be manageable. You get used to it, but the day is no longer as filled as it was. So I'm starting to learn Polish, which is what I've been meaning to do for ages. And I've got to the stage now where I can identify an elephant, a lion, and a squirrel. I'm doing pretty well.
Well, that's going to come in really handy in isolation for the next couple of months, isn't it? But no, I'm sure Camilla really appreciates you making the effort to try and learn it. But it's not an easy language to pick up, though, I imagine.
Too many Zs.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, it's lots of people kind of jumping in already this morning. Hey guys, thanks for joining us this morning. Dharmesh, Roman, Trevor, Raul. Hey guys, how you doing? If you got any questions for Chris as we go through this, drop them in the comments, and I can bring them up as we go. Coronavirus clearly affecting everywhere in the world, as you say, Chris. But I guess from your perspective, you're used to. I think most of the times I'm talking to you, you're either about to get on a plane or just got off a plane. So, this must be like literally the longest period of time you've actually been still in one place for a while, isn't it?
It is. I was meant to be traveling from mid-March through to the end of April non-stop, and obviously all that's gone away. I'm not missing it that much, to be honest. What I'm missing, I guess, is the fact that there's lots of stimulating meetings and networking. But the amount of time I'm spending on Microsoft Teams, Google Hangouts, Zoom, it's got escalated immensely. And so we're still globally connected, but we're globally digitally connected rather than physically now.
I've talked to a few people this week about the impact of not having so many conferences, but really most of the benefit from the conferences come from actually the networking that goes on afterwards, doesn't it? In terms of humans sort of connecting and everything that goes on there. Do you see there being a change to that landscape as we move forward? Because it feels like the world is as connected as ever in this period, which is phenomenal given the fact of, like you say, there's almost, I think somebody said yesterday on the US Breakfast Show that it's physical distancing but social closeness, essentially.
Yeah, one of the most radical aspects of what's going on right now is that we've never had a situation like this before, and what's escalated immensely is the connectivity of people. So I'm talking to my mother more regularly than I've ever spoken to her. I'm connecting to friends and family around the world more often than ever, and often via video. So I think we've finally realized that the world needs to have a digital backup, and we're all using that, but we're finding it's challenging because socially we've got digital backup, but commercially we don't. If you try and get hold of banks at the moment, it's hours on the phone waiting for someone to pick up because they're not in the office anymore. So there isn't the digital backup for the business world, but there is for the social world, thank goodness.
Yeah, it is a funny one. We've sort of said at 11FS, we feel like this is going to be two waves of a problem. I think the first one is the pandemic with everything with Corona, and that will dissipate over the next 3-4 months, and then it's going to be the literal financial meltdown that will be the thing that will be the most impactful over from a global perspective. Because to your point, banks are not in the building right now, but actually when they get back in the building, they're going to be pretty preoccupied with everything that's going on, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a huge fallout after this, in the same way there was when we had the global financial crisis and previous crisis. The difference with this one is it's a physical crisis rather than a financial technology crisis. And one of the things I've just started to write about, because I'm still blogging every day, it's one of the things that keeps me entertained. But we have always had disaster recovery plans for our technology. Now we have to have disaster recovery plans for our office, and we've not had those before. And I think that's clearly demonstrated by not just the banking world, but airlines, retail, everything. That this is a situation we've never faced before, and yet we could have planned for it, because we all knew it was coming. There's been enough movies and stories about pandemics in the past, so now we're living through it.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking just before we went live about Picard, right? It is amazing how many times something like Star Trek or a pandemic movie predicts a future that you think would give people a vivid enough view of something that they needed to sort of prepare for. But I mean, you mentioned the blog there. Based on the comments that I'm kind of seeing on here, it's not just keeping you entertained, but lots of other people as well. So, do you want to just talk about that a little bit? I mean, how did the blog start? Because I've said to you, I've known you for quite a few years, but I've no idea how you find the time nor the motivation to do that every day. So how did the blog come about?
Well, I'm just a really boring guy. So I kind of grew up in technology, um, and delivering technology into the financial markets, working in retail, commercial, investment banking, and insurance, as a provider. And then I got made redundant in 2002, which I've talked about before. But I ended up starting a couple of hobbies. One is drinking with friends. Um, Became the Financial Services Club. And then the other is just writing and thinking about the future of technology in banking and finance. And I was writing a lot of reports for as a freelance at research analyst for some of the big research companies like Gartner. And at one point, I was writing a monthly column on, and someone said to me, "We're starting a website for blogging. Would you be a blogger on the website?" And it wasn't paid, but it was like part of a community build back in 2007. And just because I'm seriously, as I say, boring, but equally sort of focused, I started on 1st of February 2007 writing a blog. And I felt that the best way to build a voice was to do it every day. And back in 2007, that was not so easy. But to be honest, it's now become a muscle memory. So it's something I find very easy to do. In fact, at the moment, I'm trying to restrain myself, because being stuck at home during this pandemic, I could write 5 blogs a day, but I'm trying to keep it down to 1.
Wow, I mean, it's an amazing skill set to have. I mean, I think Leader from our from 11FS has got a very similar ability, which is, I think you guys think in blogs, which is amazing. Having been a management consultant for about 10 years, I think in PowerPoint. So maybe you are what you do repeatedly to a certain degree, right?
Well, I'm actually very lucky. My mum was a shorthand typing teacher for secretarial courses, and she taught me to type when I was on my summer holidays at the age of 16. And I got up to 60 words a minute on a keyboard, so I can actually write faster than I can think, which is a great skill.
Wow, that is very impressive. I mean, the things you've been doing over the last few years. I mean, the books that you've written, not just the blog, have done incredibly well. I have to say, in terms of anybody I ever sort of come into contact with, the things that you've written are always things that people have read, which is the dream on this stuff, isn't it? It's not just things that you want to kind of get out of your head, but having the impact of people and having seen people kind of read them. So, I mean, how did you get into was it sort of a natural progression then from the blog to books?
Well, I guess, again, contextually, it's important to mention something, which is back in 1990, I did an amazing presentation about the state of the insurance industry, which is where I was focused back then. And one of the feedback forms said, "Tell me something I don't know," rather than all this pseudo babble. And I was like, I was quite offended. And I thought, well, actually, I realized what I'd done is showing my immense knowledge of the state of the industry factually, but I didn't inform. And to inform, you have to focus on what's happening next, because everyone knows what's happening today and yesterday. No one knows what's happening tomorrow. And so since then, I've always focused on looking at what's next. And I'm quite lucky in that, again, because of the muscle memory of blogging, that led to building the books, which led to building the focus on always thinking about what's next. And back in 2014, and I know you and I have had this debate, but it was actually in 2009 I wrote about banking as a service, which is talking about a platform-based financial community using apps and APIs. And I didn't realize how prescient that was back then. And obviously now everyone's talking about it. And I'm not saying I'm the father of that movement, because we talked about object orientation and service oriented architecture well before that, which is actually very similar. But then when I wrote Digital Human, for example, I picked up very strongly the vibes of Alipay in China. And that became a focus of that book, which again, back in 2017 was well before everyone else was really thinking about what was happening with mobile payments in China. So it's the combination really of the muscle memory of blogging that builds the books, and the focus on the future and what's happening next, and trying to not predict the future, but forecast some of the things that will be happening. It's much easier, as you all know, with technology to forecast what's next than it is with society and government, as demonstrated by what we're going through right now.
Yeah, technology can be reasonably predictable and not quite linear, but there's an extrapolation, isn't there? Whereas people are somewhat unpredictable, aren't they, in terms of how they react and what they do? But I mean, there's some really good sort of comments and whatnot on the on LinkedIn. I mean, like I say, the amount of people that are sort of tuning in and have been impacted over the last couple of years by reading your blog is pretty phenomenal, Chris. So it's great to see so many people are engaging with it. One person's point here is like, without coronavirus, I wouldn't be watching this. So there is some silver linings. So that's a nice thing. So I mean, tell us more about the new book that's coming out then, Chris. Because actually, I mean, to your point, there's been a lot of people talking about what they would like to do for a long period of time, but not many people really doing it. But actually, the new book is all about doing digital, right? So it's the arc of people who are really, rolling up their sleeves and getting into it, right?
Yeah, and I mean, we're still going to be doing something around the themes of the book in Q3, Q4, hopefully. But the plan was to originally do some big events in Q2, particularly in the USA, around what the book's about. And to put the book in context, I just got fed up with people saying banks are dumb and stupid and don't get technology. Banks don't get technology, but they're not dumb and stupid. They're actually quite intelligent. The issue they have is to deal with technology. It's a huge challenge because they're having to rebuild the business from what's traditionally a physical business to a digital business. It's a complete pivot of the business model and the structure of the company. Some banks get that, but a lot of banks don't, because their leadership team haven't quite woken up to the pivot. They think it's an evolution, not a revolution. And I keep saying, this is revolutionary, guys. You have to rethink the business, not just try and evolve the business. And so I wrote down the banks I felt that were pivoting. And I ended up, there's a lot of small banks that are doing this well, but I just wanted to focus on big banks that were doing this well. And I ended up writing down BBVA, ING, DBS in Singapore, China Merchants Bank, and JP Morgan Chase as the real sort of leaders in this space, and approached those 5 banks and asked them if I could interview their senior executives around how they're doing digital, to learn the lessons of how they're doing it. And luckily they all said yes. And they're all in the book as case studies and interviews. But then I won't say it's the magic ingredient, but I would say that I do bring some experience to the table, having been around for a long time. And so the mixture of what they said to me and my own experiences of doing digital implementations throughout my career, as well as business process reengineering and business transformation, that is the core essence of the new book. And so there's about 30 lessons that came out from these 5 banks that I identified, mixed with my own experiences. And to me, it's probably
it's interesting across those those organizations. There is, like you say, a few really sort of common threads, isn't there? I mean, most of those organizations have very strong leadership, don't they? Almost a talismanic CEO in charge of those organizations, which is arguably what most of the fintechs are famed for as well. People talk about the founder story, but Jamie Dimon or Ralph Hammers, you've got incredibly strong leaders there who set a very clear vision for people and galvanize that purpose behind them, don't they? So it's interesting how many of those really big companies. I mean, Francisco Gonzalez at BBVA was that for a long time as well, wasn't he, in terms of gaining that momentum? So I mean, there is a lot of commonality there, isn't there? I mean, do you think those organizations who have been most successful with this change are finding ways of continually keeping young as companies?
Well, I think it's down to some commonalities around these companies. As you say, the leadership is a commonality. But if you look at the leadership profile, every single one of those chief executives and executive teams understand that this is a pivot. It's a revolution. It's not just doing the same business as usual. You have to do business as unusual. But equally, they all had some illuminating moment where they woke up to the fact that digital banking is not the same as traditional banking. So ING got ING Direct. BBVA, when Francisco Gonzalez came in, it was after an anti-money laundering scandal. He's a guy who started life as a programmer. He got technology. And the first thing he said in 1999 is we need to contact and have relationships with customers anytime, everywhere that they want, not just in our branches. He got that from day one. Piyush Gupta used to run Citibank's offshore technology operations across India. China Merchants Bank was launched as a technology-led bank in 1987. And you may say Jamie Dimon, JP Morgan Chase, but Jamie Dimon, the first thing he did when Bank One and JP Morgan Chase came together in the early 2000s and he became chief executive is he cancelled the outsourcing contracts because he said technology is key and core to our business. And I think that's really the understanding that they all bring through. Deutsche Bank came out recently, and we all know Deutsche Bank's having huge issues, and they don't really get the technology transformation. But in their latest technology strategy, they said banking is what we do, technology is how we do it. And I think that, for me, is the crystallization of the last 2 decades or more of these developments, that if you understand technology is how we do banking, then you can start to pivot the bank.
Yeah, I know exactly. And like you say, I mean, the top of this, you said it's like changing people's business model, right? We've seen this a lot before. People have treated digital like a distribution point for products that they've had for hundreds of years. And it's much, 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 much more than that, isn't it? Given all of the things that actually you've got at the end of your arm, usually, in terms of the abilities that your mobile phone has. So I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, what was the organization's kind of reactions to? I mean, a lot of these guys, JP Morgan Chase or ING, I think they know they are seen as sort of leaders in this space. What do you think the sort of future holds for people, given the mix of these two things? We've seen maybe them react quicker than anybody else to kind of get ahead. Do you think that actually that is then sort of almost organizational DNA? So they're going to be in a situation where, given the current climate with everything that's happening with Corona, they're able to alter their environment or alter their approach to sort of benefit them as a business or benefit society?
Yeah, I mean, I keep saying that doing digital and digital transformation and digital banking is actually nothing to do with technology. The technology is the enabler, but actually the core essence of digital transformation is the transformation of the business and its culture and its operations and its structure and its practices and its products and its services. It's a complete pivot of the organization to be digital at the core. You and I often reference digital is just 1% done, and the reason why it's only 1% done is it's nothing to do with technology. It's to do with changing people, changing thinking, changing the mindset. And even though these 5 banks who joined in my new book, I've hailed as being digital transformation leaders, they haven't done it yet. They're still working on it. The 30 lessons I identified fall into 4 buckets, which is working out what to do, how to do it, doing it, and then doing it better forever. Most of them are still in the doing it bit. They're not doing it better forever. And doing it better forever is when it actually is in the DNA of the organization. and changing your DNA is really difficult.
It is. Yeah, it really is. And like I say, it becomes a if you can do that, and it becomes a cultural piece, then actually it is a positive, self-fulfilling prophecy at that stage, isn't it? Because actually it isn't about process; it's about people. And that bizarrely is like the moral of all of these stories, isn't it? Is like you say, with technology being so key, it's actually the people that actually makes all of these things really sort of work effectively. Some really good questions sort of come through. So one from Deval Gore, who's from London Partners, so the Mayor of London's office. Do you think the evolution versus revolution view will be tested now and going forward due to the current crisis? So, I mean, a lot of people have been looking at sort of evolutionary incremental steps. Do you think more radical steps are going to be needed to be taken to really catch up with where people's expectations are?
Oh, absolutely. I've already been writing about this as the fact that post-pandemic there'll be a rush to digital structures and digitalization, partly because we're learning so much about remote working and working from home already through this crisis. Most bank workers have never worked from home because of security and risk. They have to be in an office. But now we're going through this crisis, we're learning that we have to trust our workers. We have to give them more empowerment, more ability to be flexible, and access through cloud-based services to bank information, because that's how you enable security and risk, by keeping it in the cloud but allowing access from home. And, I think there's a huge rush to digitalize operations post-pandemic.
Yeah, it's going to be really, really interesting to see. A good question here from Tatiana Marsh from the Open Banking Excellence. Where will true change come from? Do you think it will come from inside or outside?
Well, it's coming from outside. I mean, again, this crisis right now, it's quite amusing if you are on Twitter or on social media, that I'm seeing a lot of things saying, what forced your digital transformation? The CEO, the CXO, or COVID-19? It's COVID-19. And what we're going to see is a lot of questioning of how we structure business, because a lot of us are going through soul searching right now. This is a great time, obviously, to reconnect with family and friends and to be intimate with your closest relationships. But at the same time, rethink what you're going to do when we come out of this. Think about what are the actions you have to take to make the business resilient post-pandemic. What do you have to implement? What do you have to do? And how are you going to do it? I'll go back to one statement from someone I interviewed in one of the banks, and they said the previous chief executive and chairman knew we had to change the bank to be digital. They just didn't know what to do or how to do it. That's what you have to focus on right now.
And I mean, that's quite a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, I've been sort of saying this recently is, I mean, the amount of people who, I mean, it's that definition of madness thing, right? You do the same thing over and over again, year in, year out, starting a big transformation, spending £1 billion, never really get to the ROI. And yet they try and start that cycle every couple of years and sort of redo it. So, I mean, I'm hoping from a lot of this is people realize that there has to be a better way of doing it. Because, I mean, to your point with the companies that you've talked to, Jamie Dimond, Francisco Gonzalez, Ralph Hammers at ING, these guys set up very radical programs of change, changing the way that they do it, not just what they were doing, as you say. Yeah, I mean, ING was one of the largest adopters of truly agile working practices that I've kind of really ever seen. So, unless they really fundamentally shift people's day-to-day lives in their businesses, then the rest of the investment in technology is never going to be there. I mean, you've spoken to probably as more banks than I have done, but the amount of people who forget that the change really has to come is quite phenomenal, really. So a few sort of questions on the book then, Chris. When's it coming out? When can people get their hands on it? Because there's a lot of people in the comments who are looking forward to getting into this one.
I think you can get the Kindle version this week on Amazon. The physical version was meant to be available this week, but my publisher tells me that it's been delivered into US and European markets, but is held by customs because there's no one available to pick them up because they're working from home. So we'll have to try and sort that one out. I did want to touch on one quick thing, which you were referencing there as well. In that at Christmas time, there was an interesting story about a big American bank who sacked one of their call center workers because they had taken a call from a desperate customer who couldn't get money, and had physically gone and met the customer and given them $20. And the rule is you cannot physically go and meet customers if you're working in a call center.
Mm.
And that hierarchical thinking of traditional banking is the big difference between those that get digital and those that don't. And that those that get digital, and ING gave me a great quote, which is, we used to be 30,000 individuals, we're now 3,000 teams of people. So they're agile, they're flat, they're team-based, and they've flattened the organization. Traditional banks like the American bank that sacked the call center worker say every single person when they walk in the office must remove their brain and run a script.
And that's weird, isn't it? I mean, when you're asking people to act like drones and not like people, then you really should just put computers in the place rather than having a human interface. And so, I mean, what do you think people can do to sort of change that? I mean, there's a good question on the comments. So Rita Martins, any learnings on how people can drastically change the culture mindset, particularly of older employees within those banks? Because often, like you say, it's not frontline staff who are worried about this or talking to customers or going out there. It's usually senior executives, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's kind of four lessons that are quickly summarized in the headline of those lessons. One is that you have to give everybody a burning platform to make them feel they have to change. Two, you have to give them a direction of where they have to go to. Three, you have to give them the opportunity to be engaged and participate in that change of direction. And four, you have to reskill them and offer them the chance to reskill, so they can feel that they're not being just told they have to change. And it's really being very open and engaging and offering opportunity rather than just telling people, well, you don't fit anymore, get lost.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how I mean, with the, like I said, globally, we're seeing senior leadership changes quite dramatically, aren't we? At sort of very top levels of banks, and while they're not the people coming in are not necessarily technologically the most savvy, they're definitely massively champions for change in that sense, which is super interesting. So,
Change management.
exactly, yeah. I mean, well, that's the thing. If leaders can be catalysts for that scale of change, then they don't necessarily have to be technologically savvy, but they do have to be open that they don't know everything about everything. Which is, I mean, at any beginning of any 10-step program, right? Admitting there's a problem is usually the first one, right?
Yeah, I'm a leader. I need to change.
Indeed, absolutely. A few comments on there about what do you think about players like Tinkoff Bank? Dharmesh sort of asked the question around: do you think what the guys at Tinkoff are doing is sort of interesting right now?
Absolutely. I mean, I've met Tinkoff, which is a story that's not well covered generally in the media. It's a bit like Nubank in Brazil, one of the biggest challenger banks in the world that no one talks about. And the fact is that we're seeing a lot of successful challenger banks in other countries. And I think what it is that most of us talk about the ones that are most notable in Europe and America, if you're European or American. Tinkoff, if you're in Russia, or Nubank if you're in Brazil, or obviously WeBank and MyBank in China if you're in China. These are hugely successful stories about new structures and new products and services using internet and network effect, which I try and cover, to be honest, but I don't do it as well as maybe I should.
I mean, Tinkoff's a really interesting one. I met up about 5 weeks ago with, so they've got their first employee in the UK. And it's interesting to start seeing that them, like you say, starting to get a bit more sort of global recognition for what they're doing, because they're very profitable, right? So like all of these challenger banks who are struggling to make revenue, those guys are leading the way on that. So, well, I mean, we're probably gonna have to leave it there, Chris, because we're coming about to the top of the hour now. So where can people go and find out more about the Finanser to start with, and then where can people go and find out more about doing digital?
Thefinanser.com, Chris_Skinner on Twitter. If you Google, you'll find me pretty much everywhere. I'm trying to be unavoidable.
That's a pretty good marketing strategy right there. And as for doing digital over on Amazon, Great.
Amazon's my preferred destination, but if you prefer Google or Apple or whatever is your destination, you'll find them there. If you like bookshops, you probably won't find it in most bookshops because it's a digital distribution strategy rather than a physical distribution strategy.
Well, there was a good comment on the comments, which is Lucy Heaven says, "I think we should all be forced to practice what we preach and go and read the digital version," which is probably a very good way to end this. So, Chris, thank you very much for joining us. Good luck with the Polish lessons.
And stay well and stay safe, everyone.
Indeed. Thanks very much, guys. See you later.
Cheers now.